Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Mayflower resources at AmericanAncestors.org. My name is Ginevra Morse. I'm the Director of Education and Online Programs at American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society. I will be moderating today's event. We are a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history, and we are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. So our presenter today is Don LeClair. Don works on our database collections and is responsible for the search experience at AmericanAncestors.org. He has 30 years of experience in the software industry, working in and leading engineering and product management teams. He is also a longtime member of NEHGS and enjoys tracing his ancestors through New England and New York. So, of course, this year we commemorate the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower landing in Plymouth, and tracing your connection to the Mayflower passengers has never been easier. AmericanAncestors.org offers the largest collection of searchable Mayflower genealogy databases in the world. Today, Don will review and preview some of those databases and online resources available at both AmericanAncestors.org, as well as our special anniversary website, mayflower.americanancestors.org. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type your question in the question panel to the right of your screen. We'll address those after the presentation. There is no handout for today's session, but we are recording this event, and starting tomorrow, you can easily go back and review any of the content from the presentation on our website. So if you missed something on today's first listen, don't worry, you can always go back and review the presentation later. All right, so without further ado, I will turn things over to Don.
Thank you very much, Ginevra. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I'm extremely glad this was a scheduled webinar, since most of us are not in a position to go meet with other people at a live event. So I'm thrilled to be here and talk to you about the resources that we have on American Ancestors for doing or expanding your Mayflower experience in honor of this 400th commemoration. So what I'm going to talk about in the first part is the Mayflower. We refer to it as the Mayflower 2020 site. The site name is mayflower.americanancestors.org. And we are, as we speak, in the process of releasing an update to it. So the site is available, but there's a few changes that are just didn't quite make it before the start of the webinar, but it will be available momentarily. So this site is really designed to help people sort of make a personal Mayflower connection with a lot of resources that we have in terms of various aspects of the 400-year commemoration. So talking about the nations and cultures are involved, confirming your ancestors, looking at database searches, events, as well as even shopping. So as we go forward, I'd like to walk you through some of the key aspects of this site. We've talked about some of those basic categories, but really the main idea is you can get information about the passengers and the native nations, help you with your own Mayflower research. And if you're preparing, for example, for an application to the Mayflower Society, how do you go about getting that information, get documented, and how far back do you have to research? And then we also provide information about the many Mayflower-related events and education opportunities that are coming up in this year as we get to the 400th anniversary. And of course, no experience is complete without the ability to shop for Mayflower-focused materials. And this Mayflower site is available to everyone, so you don't have to be a member. You can be just interested and take advantage of the information that's put up on this site. So I'm going to show you go through this sort of menu by menu and take you through some of the areas that are in each of these. So the first item is nations and cultures. So as I mentioned, we are inclusive of both the Pilgrims, but also the Wampanoags and the Native Americans who were here when the Pilgrims arrived. So one of those key items under nations and cultures is the topic of Native New England research, which I have pointed there with an arrow. So if you were to click on the Native New England Research that will take you to a page with a summary about the native nations here in New England, as well as a variety of information about what kind of research can you do, what resources are available. So for example, we'll talk about what the nations that do exist in this area, how you might use things like land, court, and probate records to find out more, census records, other historical sources. So it's doing Native American research is different than doing things for the Europeans that came to North America, just because there's different kinds of records and traditions and how things are done. So one of the things I'd like to highlight is actually at the bottom of the page, which is the webinar that we have into researching Native American ancestors. So Megan Siekman, who works here at NEHGS, has done a wonderful webinar talking about the resources we have and how you can get into more detail for doing that Native American type research, in addition to the, if you will, the more traditional, or the thing people think about more often, which is often the pilgrims themselves. So going back, well, then we'll start off by looking at the passengers and crew. So there on the left side, you can see the red arrow pointing to the passengers and crew. And this will take you to a page which gives you a lot of high-level information about who actually came over on the Mayflower 400 years ago. And you see here in the center of the page, there's information about which categories of things you'd like to get a list of. So in this example, I've selected the passengers. We do know about some of the crew members, not all of them, but some of them were referenced by name. So anybody that we have information about appears on that list at the bottom. But if you click on the radio button of passengers, then you will see the list of the 102 people that were officially the passengers, and the people who were not counted as passengers appear in gray. So one of the things that I think, if you're not that familiar with the Mayflower story, is that the remarkable number of people that didn't make it through the first year. So in that first year, more than half of the people who came on the Mayflower perished, most of those during the winter, shortly after they landed here in the Massachusetts colony. So you can see that by clicking on the died in the first year, and you can see which people those are that fall into that category. But perhaps more popular for the folks on the phone today are the people who left descendants. So many of us, I think, are interested in finding out if we have Mayflower ancestors, or if we're pretty sure we do, we want to do research to find out more about them. So you click the button on left descendants, you can see that there are 50 people, 50 of the passengers who came over on the Mayflower have left descendants. And then the names that appear on the list that I referred to before are all hyperlinks. So if we pick John Howland, who happens to have the most descendants of any of the Mayflower passengers. But if I click on then John Howland, I will get a short, sort of a thumbnail sketch about John Howland and each of the passengers. There's a page for each of the passenger families that came over. It will tell you in a couple of paragraphs a short summary about who that person is. If we know the names of the spouse and the names of the children, then we have a list of that on the right-hand side, where you can see that first generation descendants, John Howland, in this case Elizabeth Tilley, who was also a passenger. If you're looking for more detailed information, then we're very happy to have provided reprints from a book called The Pilgrim Migration, which is a wonderful resource that provides detailed documentation about each of the people that came over during this, what we call the Great Migration, but starting with the Mayflower. So if we click on View Complete Biography, this takes us to a page that gives us a significant amount of information about John Howland. It's interesting because it's somewhat different from what's available in the silver books or some of the pure genealogy type books, in that it gives you as much information as we have about the person. Like, for example, what offices they held. John Howland serving as an assistant in the colony, and other things like that, their education, other information that they have. Many people came and had a time that they were in servitude, or essentially became freemen, so you have information when they were formed, became freemen in the colony. And then the estate section is a little bit different for anybody who's done research in the Mayflower Silver Books, where the Silver Books include information about deeds and whatnot that specifically relate to tracing family relationships. these books give you a detail about what are all the known real estate transactions, where did a person settle, where did they move to if they indeed removed, all available on this one page. And there's quite a bit of information there, so if you scroll down towards the bottom, then we also have the information about that first generation family. So here we're seeing for John Holland the information about his marriage to Elizabeth Tilley, and then their 10 children with birth and death information, and their spouse as well. So it's a pretty complete view of each of the Mayflower passengers to the extent whatever information we have known today is available and presented on this page. So the next thing I would talk about is something a little bit different, which is about the modern descendants. So this is an opportunity for you to get sort of more personally involved in the Mayflower story. And so if we click on the modern descendants, this will take us to a map where people who volunteered to add information or want to participate in this have put in their information about who they're descended from, put a thumbnail photo, and then we can see the sort of diaspora of the Mayflower descendants around the world. So here I've taken this map, and by the way, if you go to the site, the map has currently over 3,000 pins in it, and it takes a few minutes for it to load, so be patient. But if you pick an ancestor you're interested in, here we clicked John Holland, then you see the set of pins for the people who've identified themselves as Holland descendants, and you can click on one of those pins. You also, if you want to see a larger version of the map, you click the enlarge map button on the top right. And now here I have essentially a full screen view of those descendants. So I can operate at this level. I can also zoom into a location. So for example, if I wanted to take a look at people in Hawaii, I could zoom in on Hawaii, and we can see that on the next page. So here we can see there's been a few people here that have identified themselves as ancestors, and here we have Lydia Highlander, who is descended from 3 passengers. We asked for John Holland, so she's listed for John Holland, but she's also a descendant of Edward Fuller and John Tilley. So this is the kind of information we have. It's a free resource that's available for anyone who would like to participate. And then at the bottom, if you scroll down below the map, you can see we have a gallery of descendants. So if you would like to participate, then you would submit to us a headshot or a photograph of yourself, list which set of pilgrim passengers you're descended from, and then you can put in information about a location where you live, so we can put your pin into the map. And you optionally have the ability to make a comment about what does it mean to you to be a Mayflower descendant. So you can see, for example, that Clive on the right-hand side talks about being aware of what those people were able to accomplish coming over, surviving that first winter, and being able to build a growing establishment here in the United States was one of the inspirations for that person. One thing that was almost a more fun view of things is who are some of the famous descendants. So the belief today is that there's over 30 million descendants of the Mayflower passengers living here and there around the world. But there are quite a variety of people who would qualify as famous descendants. So if we go click through to the famous descendants, we have there a list of, in this page, we have 30 of them. So you can see their pictures there, so that you could scroll down. As I said, there's 30 pictures, and then for each person, if you were to click on, say, Humphrey Bogart there in the top middle, then that tile will flip around and you will find out who he's descended from, and there will be a short biography for Humphrey Bogart. And this was something we started a year or so ago. I think it's fun, especially with some of the younger folks who maybe don't have the same appreciation for the Mayflower passengers, to see some of the famous people who are alive today that are actually descended from these Mayflower passengers. And we also have recently just published a book called the Mayflower 500, which goes through a variety of famous people and gives you actually detailed information about their lineage back to Mayflower passengers. So the next topic we have then is under events, and I'll highlight, just for our discussion today, the education programs that we have for 2020. And I think given the current state of affairs, we'll focus on online programs because we don't have any issues with having people travel to those. I mean, there are and hopefully will be before too long in-person events as well. But we have a variety of webinars that we're doing, such as the one we're in today. We're also offering a course called Verifying Your Mayflower Lineage, which is an online course being presented by both staff from NEHGS and Margaret Boberts, who comes from the General Society of Mayflower Descendants. So it's a great class. It has indeed started, but it's not too late to get involved. It will be going on over the course of 3 weeks, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that later on. But anyway, the event page is designed to provide you ongoing information about various events, activities, and whatnot that are related to this 400th anniversary. For many people, and maybe some of the folks that are on today, you're interested in confirming or either completing or confirming your ancestry. So we have a section there called Verify Your Lineage. So underneath that Confirm the Ancestry banner, you click on Verify Your Lineage. That will take you to a page that provides you some information on what we can do to help you. So in addition to having the databases, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, we also have a research services group that can help you to verify your family's history and do additional work if you require it to help you with your documentation. If your goal is to join the Mayflower Society or the General Society of Mayflower Descendants, we also have a link there from this page that will take you to the contacts from General Society of Mayflower Descendants. So if you're not aware, the way you join the Mayflower Society is through your local state. And I'm assuming here that most people are United States. They do indeed extend beyond the United States. So there are chapters available in Canada and Europe and other places. But basically, you would figure out what is the local society you join. This page will give you a link back to where you make contact to go start the application process to become a member of the Mayflower Society. If you are interested in getting help from NEHGS on your research, then we have a link from that very same page to make an inquiry to do some research. So basically, you'll get a form, you'll fill out your name and contact information, and then you fill in which passenger you think you're related to, describe what your goals are, and then the services team will be in touch with you to give you some assessment on what they can do and what they can offer to help you with your research problems. Now, we'd also talked about being able to do shopping, and there are two options here that we have available under shop. So one is the Mayflower 2020 shop, which gives you, if you will, themed things that you might want to have to spice up your Mayflower 400 celebration. And then there's also the bookstore at NEHGS, which might give you valuable reference or other books that would help you with your research and history on the Mayflower. So if we click on the Mayflower shop, you can see here some of the same things. We have bags, there's t-shirts, you can get mugs. So if you're a descendant of Priscilla Mullins, and you can see up at the top left, you have the opportunity to get a cup themed for Priscilla, or really seriously any of the other passengers. That's just the example we had. So you can request which passenger you want and get a little something about sort of a silhouette of that person and a thumbnail sketch about their history. So it can be fun things to take advantage of as we go through 2020. If you want to have a keepsake or set of keepsakes for your Mayflower passenger or just other things you're interested in, the Mayflower 2020 shop would be a great place to look. At the bookstore at NHGS, we have a variety of books, some of which we've actually mentioned, but we have, for example, the Mayflower 500, which has just come out in the last several weeks, which is just documenting some of these 500, over 500 notable descendants of the Mayflower passengers, including many famous personalities such as Taylor Swift, for example. We also have from Robert Charles Anderson, the Puritan Pedigrees, which takes the phenomenal research he's done over decades on the arrival of the Mayflower passengers and early settlers to New England, and talks about the roots of that migration and some of the history and the people and families that as they prepared to come from England to settle in New England. There's really a great new book about that that's available and now is one of our top sellers. And then I mentioned that Robert Charles Anderson had done this Great Migration project. So what we're seeing here is the Great Migration Directory. There's also a series of Great Migration books that cover the years from 1620 to, I believe, 1635, covering all of the people that have come to New England during that period. And you can find all of that on shopAmericanAncestors.org. And the last thing I just wanted to mention is if you find that you're a Mayflower descendant and you would like to, the General Society of Mayflower Descendants publishes a series of books known as the Silver Books, which if you look at this picture, you can see why, because the covers are actually silver. And those books are typically the first 5 generations of descendants organized by family. So because as you're seeing here on the top left, we have Gregory Priest and then Samuel Fuller and Edward Doty. So there's a volume for each passenger, and then there may be multiple parts in some of the cases where there's a significant number of descendants. You might have a part 1, 2, 3, or even 4. So those books are also available through the bookstore if you are interested in acquiring that information to help you with your research. So I've given you a brief tour of the most of the site. That's how we want to go to talking about searching databases, which is certainly an important part of the focus of this call. So if you go to the search databases and you click the database word there that we see, that'll take you to a summary of really some of the key resources that we have as available as online database on American ancestors. So this page, you can scroll down and see them, but we'll come back and talk about it in a moment. But we have study projects such as Great Migration Begins, Early New England Families, probate file papers, as well as Mayflower 5th generation descendants. So if you wanted to sort of have a tour of the databases that are available, that's available on the mayflower.americanancestors.page page. So rather than going through that, I think maybe now would be a good time to switch over back to regular AmericanAncestors.org, and we'll look at some of these databases in a little more detail and what information we have to help you with your research. So there's several key databases for you, and what I wanted to do is try to provide a clear explanation of what databases are available and what is available to you depending on your level of membership or with American Ancestors. So everything that we've talked to up till this point on the Mayflower.AmericanAncestors.org page is available to anyone. You don't have to be logged in. You don't have to be a member. That's freely available. Doing database research, you have to have some level of association with us, at least what we call a guest member. But let me try to review some of the key databases that we have and talk about then that membership level and how that works. So at the top of the page, we have things that are available to our individual and members and above. So that would include that's this first section, sorry. That would include, for example, the Mayflower family's 5th generation descendants, which we're going to talk about in just a couple of minutes. We also have available the Mayflower Descendant magazine or journal, which has great articles on family history related to the Mayflower passengers and other people that arrived in early New England. And then we have the Great Migration Begins, which is a study project covering that early period of immigration to New England that Robert Charles Anderson did. So for those, that set of databases and others, you would need to be an individual member, for which there is an annual fee. If you go to AmericanAncestors.org.join, you can find the details on each one of these levels. If some of the people on the phone happen to be Family Search affiliates, then we have some additional databases. We have a strong partnership with Family Search, and we have some databases that they share with us and quite a number that we share with them. So it's really a bi-directional partnership. And so as a Family Search member, you can go from the Family Search site, be able to register on American Ancestors as a member, and then you'll get access to some additional resources such as the Barnstable probate records, which would give you there was a significant number of the pilgrims moved eastward along Cape Cod, and this would give you information from that early years in terms of the probate records, which can be a wonderful source of information about families and family relationships, as well as the study project, which we call Early New England Families, which is Alicia Crane Williams' project, is going through and documenting and putting sketches together on other families starting in the 1641 period that have settled in New England. And that's a study project that is tied to the Tories' New England marriages prior to 1700. So if you're not familiar with the Tory book, as it's often called, he's documented pretty much every marriage he could find that happened in New England before 1700, and has a relatively cryptic set of notes about those people and when they were married and possibly other information. And Alicia's been over a number of years building out sketches to really beef up that information and present it back in a much more usable, accessible family-style approach to what each of those people or each of those couples' family relationships are. And then here at the last section is things that are available to all members. In this case, I mean also guest members. If you want to do a search on American ancestors, there are approximately 40 databases that are available at no fee. You just sign up as a guest member and you have access to those. Two of, I think, the best ones related to the Mayflower are the Massachusetts Vital Records from 1620 to 1850. So these are the for most of the towns in Massachusetts, we have the birth, marriage, and death information from those vital records available as an index database. And then we also have, for example, the Plymouth County probate file papers. So all of the wills and probate information from the founding of the colonies up to 1881 are available for Plymouth County. For example, you can find John Alden's original handwritten will is available on that site. And this is not just an index, this is the actual file papers from the Supreme Court of Massachusetts who made a partnership with us. So Plymouth County is available, but we have a variety of other counties, including Berkshire, Bristol, Essex. The list at the bottom, I won't necessarily read through all of them, but it's most of the counties in Massachusetts at this point. We have a set of probate file papers for that. So certainly for the early years after the Pilgrims settled in the Americas here, you can get probate information, whether you're a full paying member or just a guest. So let's talk specifically about a database that we call the Mayflower Family's 5th Generation Descendants. So what we have is we have a partnership with the General Society of Mayflower Descendants. They're the ones who published the silver books I talked about a couple of minutes ago. And so this is a series of books that indexes the first 5 generations. And when we say 5, that means for the 5th generation, the books typically include at least the birth information for the 6th generation. So you'd have a couple at generation 5, they have n number of children, you'd get their children, and when they were born would be included in that book. So basically, if you're looking to validate that you are indeed a Mayflower descendant and you get a match at that 5th or 6th generation, then you know you're in, because those things have been proved and vetted with the GSMD. And if you make it there, then you don't really have to do detailed documentation. You can just make references to what's in the silver books. Now, the agreement we have is not to index the entire silver books. We have indexed the pages that cover the 5th generation. So it gets you to that point. Then if for generations 1 through 4, you'd either have to acquire the book or look at it at your library to get the detailed information. But you know you're in. Lineage is included, and we'll show it to you in a moment. So it's like 31 volumes in total. We have over 500,000 searchable names based on that 5th generation. And we'll take a look in more detail now. This is just a little thing that we did a word cloud based on who were the names in the 5th generation. So certainly you'll see some of the ones you'd expect in terms of Bradford and Doty and Fuller and others, but there's a pretty significant number of new names as you get further down 5 generations. So just because when you're researching those last names of those Pilgrim passengers doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to make a connection here. There's actually quite a wide variety of names that are available in this database. So I want to make sure to make it easy to find these things. If you go to the if you go to search and then browse databases A to Z, you get to a page. And if you just type in the search by database name field, you can type in the word Mayflower here, and this will give you a list of all the databases that have association with Mayflower. So we pretty much talked about most of these already. What you can see in the first column is a magnifying glass. If you click on that, that will take you to the search page. The second column just describes whether this is a database with images or with index only. Now, all of these happen to have images with them. And then the little star there just is a way that you can set your own personal favorites to help you make them easier to search in the future. So if we look at this page, in the third row here, you can see Mayflower family's 5th generation descendants. So if I want to go off and search that, I just could click on either the name or click on the magnifying glass, and that will take me forward. So this is the search page. This is a search page that's aligned specifically for this database. So it only lets you search the fields that are actually used. And so you have the fields of first and last name. You can pick a year range if you want to limit it. Record types, the record types are primarily birth, baptism, marriage, death, and burial. You can pick the location in terms of a city or state. And then if you have the option, if you want to limit yourself to a specific volume of the books, you can do that. And we include family members, so you can search based on father, mother, and spouse. So the database, the link is at the bottom of the page here. It's a long URL, which is why I wanted to take you through that process of using browse databases A to Z, because that will be a much easier way to find the database than trying to remember or scribble down the URL for this database specific page. But one of the things that's important is that's the search page. Sometimes that's what fills up your window and you don't know to look down. So I would encourage you, if you're using any of our databases, that you page down below that search page, and we'll give you additional information and resources. So for example, we have the search tips is the first section that tells you a little bit more about what fields are searchable and things about, for example, for the family member names, you can search for spouse, mother, and father. We also do wildcarding, so explanation of how to do wildcards. And then we'll have some sample images of some pages from that book. And you can page further down from here, and there's additional information with the database description. And perfectly appropriate to this database is a list of exactly which ones of the silver books are included in this database. So some people ask, what about one volume? If you look at the database description, you can see which volumes are included. So 2 things I can point out, for example, for John Alden, it starts with part 2 because part 1 covers generations 1 through 4. So we don't have that volume online, but the parts 2, 3, 4, 5 of the Alden books, which are 5th and 6th generation descendants, are all included in this database. And then we have also in this database, I'll just mention the William Brewster. It's the Mayflower Families in Progress. So this was work that was in process to do a new improved silver book for Brewster, and we were able to get the pink version of these books, which is sort of the preliminary review, indexed and available online. So if you're looking to just understand exactly what's in the database or what's not, then reading through the database description will help you out. So now I'll come back and do an actual search. So one of my personal ancestors is Nathan Snow. So I'd had him in my tree. I can put in a range. In this case, I want to do it simple. I search for Nathan Snow, born somewhere between 1750 and 1760, and select the birth type. And this is the kind of information I get back. So one of the things that's kind of fun about this research is that what I see, for example, is there's 2 births of the same date for Nathan Snow. But what you see here is that he's actually got 2 different lines back to Mayflower passengers. So in the first case, we're seeing Nathan Snow, who's descended from Peter Brown. And then in the second instance, we have Nathan Snow, who's descended from John Alden. So this is something that you may find. It's not enormously uncommon to have cases where someone's descended from multiple passengers. And so if you have that, as you're doing your searches, you may find some of those connections. And one of the things you see here is in that text that I was just pointing at, that is the line from, in this case, Nathan Snow back to John Alden. So you can see his father was Nathan Snow, of James Snow, of Holtstill Alden. So we have that for the actual people in these books who are direct descendants of the Mayflower passengers, you can see what their lineage is back to their progenitor. Now, there are also, I mentioned in record types before, most of the records are birth, marriage, and death. We do also have references to deeds, and those are deeds that are specifically where there's family discussions that are referenced in the text. So we do have the deed references as well from the books. So if you click on one of those records, so we take the Nathan Snow from the Peter Brown side, then I have a little thumbnail that gives me a list here of the information about the record for Nathan Snow's birth. I have a small view of the page with a view button, so I can drill. If I click on view, it will take me down to a full-size version of that page, and we'll see that in a moment. And then I also have over on the right-hand side a list of the other people who are referenced on this page. So they can just help you do some navigation. If you came in looking for Nathan Snow, but you had an interest in Abigail Beale, then you'd see that she's also on that page. You could click on the link for Abigail Beale and you'd see whatever records we have for Abigail on this page. But having done that, let's go click on the view button and then see a detailed page for the book. So here I've zoomed in and you can see the information from the page. As I said, we can zoom right in, so I can make this really large, and we can see Nathan is the first son here. We see his birth date. And I have the option to download this image if I want to. I also have in the citation text, which appears immediately underneath the image, there is a relatively short URL. I say relative because it's not incredibly short, but it's much shorter than the URL you have on the page. So if you're documenting your information or want to copy it into your family tree software, it's great. It can be very helpful to use this citation link that will get you right back to this page if you need to have it saved away for future reference. One of the recommendations that I'm going to carry forward from some folks here is that it's always a good idea to check for new scholarship. As somebody has put it, the Mayflower passengers are some of the most studied people in the history of the world from a family history perspective. But even having said that, there is sometimes new information. So one of the ways you can check for that is to use the search of journals and periodicals. So this is a category of databases that we have on AmericanAncestors.org that you really can't find anywhere else. So we have this category would include some of the, I would say, strongest resources for Mayflower research. So it includes the Mayflower Descendant Journal, the New England Historical Genealogical Register, which has been in publication since 1847, shortly after we were founded, as well as the American Genealogist and others. Now, for the journals, you search primarily based on first and last name. The years in the journal category would refer to the year that the article was written, not the year of an event. So normally, if you're doing a search in journals, you just put the first and last name of the person you're looking for. So here we have Isaac Allerton, and we can do a search and we would find information that's available about them. And that would take us through and do a search of any one of these various journals that we have available online. Now, the reason I mentioned Isaac Allerton is actually there was some new discoveries about his background and his family that were just published in 2019 in the Historical Genealogical Register. So this one is actually not available as a database online today, but it will be probably within 1 to 2 months. If you are a member of NEHGS, you can always view the most current issues of the register online in PDF form. But here we can see that now, for the first time ever, we actually know specifically about Isaac Allerton, where he came from and who his parents were. So it's the kind of thing that's happening. There's certainly been an ongoing focus on the Mayflower passengers and the Pilgrims, and there has been some interesting new research in just the last couple of years that you could take advantage of by using these databases on American Ancestors. So we've covered a number of databases that are available online today. So I want to talk about 2 wonderful new resources that are coming very soon about Mayflower. So we already have really the largest set of Mayflower information that's available anywhere, but it's about to get dramatically better. So a little over 2 years, started a partnership between the General Society of Mayflower Descendants, Family Search, and American Ancestors. And the idea is to digitize and make available information from the applications to the General Society of Mayflower Descendants from its founding up through 1920. So the database is available soon. We're planning to have the full database available around of June. This set of applications will only be actually published on American Ancestors. We have a preview available today with the descendants of Peter Brown and William Winslow, and we will be adding the rest of the passengers shortly. Now, because membership applications provide date of birth, location of birth, both your parents' names and their personal details, we want to be careful about identity theft, unfortunately, in the way the world is today. So there is a privacy rule that says we will not be able to post applications for when the applicant was born after 1919. So starting in 1920, if you have an application, essentially we're applying a 100-year rule. We'll put up that full application, index that for anybody who is essentially more than 100 years born more than 100 years before today. Now, that still will give us approximately 30,000 applications with all data indexed for each generation. So this database will be made available to the members of NEHGS with an individual membership and above, the Family Search affiliates, as well as a special arrangement for the General Society of Mayflower Descendant members themselves. So if we look at this, the database, the search screen will actually start out remarkably similar to what you just saw for the Mayflower family 5th generation. A couple of minor differences is if you happen to know a membership number, like you have some ancestor or relative who's already done an application to the Mayflower Society, you'll be able to search by their general membership number. For the family members, we are indexing information about spouses, but we will not be including information about father and mother. Other than that, it's pretty much the same approach as we would normally recommend to people. You start with first and last name and do your searching there. So I'll do a search here for Henry Whitman. And then I've got the application for Henry Fay Whitman. Now for each, what I said, we'll have information about the index, the information about the person from their lineage side of things. It will also include a basic record with the type of record, which will indicate when that person joined, what state or society they joined, in this case, California, and we'll have information there about their general member number and who they're descended from, in this case, Peter Brown. So now if we click through to Henry Whitman, we would get taken to an image of that application, and here we see the application for his lineage, starting with, as all applications do for the Mayflower Society, they start with generation 1 is the passenger, in this case, Edward Winslow. And then we got generation by generation available in the application form. Two things I wanted to mention. One is we have a feature we added last year called Print as PDF. So if you would like to, or say print range, technically is the name of the feature, you can print a series of pages all at once rather than do them one at a time. And using your browser functionality, you can change set the direction of your print not to go necessarily to your hard printer, but to a PDF. So for example, if I have a 4-page application, I can say print pages 1 through 4, put those into a PDF from my browser print, and then I got an electronic copy of the entire application. I don't have to deal with multiple separate pages to deal with it and view it. And then up at the top right corner, if you want to page through, you just use the little blue carrots left and right, and that'll click you through right and left through the multiple pages of the application itself. So I'll go fairly quickly through this. We have, for some people, if you haven't seen an application for the Mayflower Society, I thought I would give you an example just to see what the whole application would look like. I not so randomly chose one for my own grandfather, Titus George LeClair, who applied, in this case, for Peter Brown. So the first page of the application just tells you the general member number, the state number, what state you're applying to, and then you have an autograph of the person who signed it. You click forward into the next page of the application, then you see sort of what we saw before. The generations are laid out in the numbered by generation, starting at 1 for the passenger, and then going down through up to pages, I believe it is, to cover the generations getting down to the applicant themselves. So if we looked at the next page, then we would see here is Titus George LeClair, is my grandfather. So he's an 11th generation descendant. So one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is the silver books take you down through 5 generations. What's really kind of exciting about this database is this is now getting us down to generations 11, 12, and 13 potentially from these. So it's make it much easier to find your Mayflower ancestors by searching through these applications. And then if we click forward, the last page of the application is pretty much the approval information. Tells you when was it received by the state society, basically showing it through the process until the point that you've been formally become a member of the society, and then you have the stamps and that sort of thing. So that's the sort of typical 4-page application. The formats are not exactly the same through all of the history of the GSMD, but that's the general full page. For supplemental applications, there's often a 2-page or a shorter version for supplementals, which means supplemental is one where you've applied on one descendant and then, one ancestor, but you want to do a supplemental application for some other person that you're descended from. And given that you're already a member, it's a little bit shorter form. So those are sometimes 2 pages long. So that gives you a perspective, I think, on the applications database. The other thing that we're doing as part of this partnership with Family Search is actually putting out trees for each Mayflower passenger. So in this case, we have a slightly different approach on that privacy rule in that the trees will include all the people from all the applications where the individual person mentioned on the application was born before 1920. So, and for this case, we'll be taking people from approximately 100,000 different applications. And just to try to clarify that, if I take my own application on John Alden from last year, the application data would include my grandfather, who was born before 1920, and generations prior. I mean, myself and my father would be excluded because we were born after 1920, but that full line is available for searching through ancestries. The trees can be found, there's links from the database description on the application database, and as part of this arrangement, Family Search is also making these trees available through their genealogies section. So you'll have two opportunities to take advantage of these databases, of these tree databases. So here you can see at the bottom of the description for the General Society of Descendants membership applications, I have links to, or a list of all of the possible passengers, and then here I have the ones that are complete today are available as links. So I can see Edward Winslow there with the big red arrow next to it. So if I click on Edward Winslow, and I'm signed in, of course, I need to be signed in, then I will be taken to American Ancestries, and here I can see, here's Edward Winslow right at the top, and then I can browse through this. There's arrows like down here at the bottom that will expand, so I want to see more generations, so I can navigate through this. There's also different styles of charts. So if you use this little brown pull down or tan pull down over here, then you can pick a different chart style if there's some other version you want to use for navigating. So it's pretty much a standard tree type view. If you click forward on, you can see how we can actually do a search within this tree. So I think I have someone named Campbell, and I've heard rumors that the Campbells might be related to Pilgrims in some fashion. I can put in all or part of a name, and then while I'm doing that, it'll pull up a list of the relevant names that are in this tree. So here I'm looking at the Edward Winslow tree. I start typing Campbell. I can say, let's take a look at Audrey Louise Campbell, who was born in 1919. And if I click on Audrey, then I'll get the information about her birth, who she married, and then I have information associated with her name about what was the source of information for including her in this tree. So I can see there are actually 2 different applications that are involved in this, and I can see that information. Those are always going to be associated with her name, not her, in this case, her birth or marriage information. And if I click then on that box with the source information, that will open it up. And I can now see more detailed information about, here's the indication of an application, and here is, for example, is the General Society reference number. So if I wanted to, if I was a descendant of Audrey Louise Campbell, then I could probably just document my relationship back to Audrey and use this general reference number, and I would not have to necessarily document previous generations because someone has already applied on that line. So this is really going to, I think, help a lot of people get to the point of being able to prepare their applications to the Mayflower Society or prove their own lineage in dramatically faster fashion than has been available before. So if I gave you a quick tour of these trees and ancestries. If you're interested in learning more about ancestries, I would recommend in our learning resources, we have a recorded webinar done by Claire Vale just last February about how American ancestries works. That's a nice introduction to that. So that could give you a little more perspective on what capabilities are available in American ancestries if you would like to take advantage of them, or just to learn more about how you might be able to browse through it when you're researching these Mayflower databases. So as I said, these databases are not, these two things are not complete yet. They're up in sort of a preview mode. If you go to the databases A to Z, you will find a reference for the Mayflower applications database, which has 2 volumes complete. So it's sort of, I call it a preview mode. But when we have that completed, they will be formally announced on our blog, which is called dbnews.americanancestors.org. So you can either watch that site, or if you'd like to sign up, you can just enter your email address here on the right-hand side of that page, and then we will send you updates for that and any other databases that come out. The DB News blog, if you choose the emails, every time we add a new database or new volume to database, we'll put out a notice so you know what's coming and what's available to you on American Ancestors. So hopefully this has been a good and short tour for you. I think that there's really a phenomenal set of Mayflower resources available. We have the mayflower.americanancestors.org site. You can learn about the history. So you can see timelines about this. You can personally participate in some of the 400th anniversary commemorations by putting up your feelings about being a Mayflower descendant, as well as shop and search. So it's really a great time to be able to do your research on Mayflower ancestry, and really phenomenal set of resources that haven't been available before.
All right, well, thank you, Don. So before we get to your questions, I just wanted to remind everyone that we are currently in the middle of an online course verifying your Mayflower lineage. This is a 3-session online course. You can still register, you can still participate, you can still access any of the recordings of the classes that have already passed. You actually have until the end of this month, or actually, yes, the end of this month to register. And you will have access to the class recordings, handout slides, and other materials until the end of June 2020. And I will share a link to that course registration if you're interested in my follow-up email. But for right now, let's tackle your questions. Go ahead and type your query into the question panel, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the time provided. We're not going to get to everyone's question today, but we will provide some other ways for you to follow up and get your question answered. So to begin with, Don, we have a few questions about kind of the nature of the applications that are going to be included in that applications database. Are they only ones that have been approved? And also, what happens if a line has since been determined ineligible or inaccurate? Would you still find those applications in the database?
Thanks, Jennifer. That's an excellent question. So the database is including only the approved applications, so we're not putting out the disapproved ones. It is possible that there's will have been a small number of cases where something has recently been proven ineligible or incorrect, in which case if we find those out, we will either annotate those or remove them. But the process that we're going through now is to include the ones that are approved and avoid confusion by including the ones that have been rejected because they have contained some kind of erroneous information on the lineage.
Great, thank you. And also a few questions regarding the documents that usually are included with an application. Are copies of those documents that are used as kind of proof or evidence of a certain line, will those also be viewable and accessible through the database, the applications database?
At this point, our plan is to include only the application itself and not the supporting documentation, with the exception that the form usually has the references are included in that form in one way or another. So you might reference the town vital records volume and page, but if there are photocopies of, for example, the vital records, we do not expect to include those at this time, partly because of a volume item, the size of the information required, but also depending on how they were filed in the folders at the General Society, it isn't always completely clear which application or supplemental applications they tied to. So rather than risk that potential confusion, we're staying focused on indexing and putting up the forms themselves.
And just to clarify, for that applications database, can you search for any name within an application, or do you have to search by applicant? So, for example, in the Ancestries, you showed how you could search just a name within the tree. Can you kind of do a similar search with the applications database?
Yeah, it's also a good question. And so you'll be able to search, generally speaking, for any name and any generation on the database. There's a couple of interesting sort of exceptions, which is it's not highly unusual for people in generation 2 and or generation 3, particularly women, to lack specific birth, marriage, and death information. So what the index will include is any person who has a date and or location for their birth, marriage, and death. So if all we have is a reference that we think we know the person's name, and I say women just because it's an unfortunate fact, is that's usually the group that had the least documentation. So if for some reason a woman didn't have those events dated and or with locations, then you might not find her, but that's almost exclusively in generation 2. Pretty much in order to join the Mayflower Society, you were expected to have birth, marriage, and death information for each generation, so probably virtually everyone will be included that way.
And I know this question is still kind of up in the air, but a few people are asking it. When will the applications database be available? Do you have an estimate?
Yes, the estimate we have right now is that it would be available by the end of June. All of the actual indexing work has been done. The process that's going on that's taken a little longer than we'd hoped, although we're still actually on the original timeline, is to deal with just resolving conflicts between multiple different applications where occasionally there might be differences in dates or something like that. So as I said, or maybe I didn't make it clear, we have about half of the trees done. And then we have another half that are currently in process. And I hope by the time we get that other half done, then we should have both the trees and applications done.
All right, so definitely worth checking out the trees and seeing if your ancestor or potential ancestor might already be listed, and you can start searching that today. So I know we're kind of running out of time, but a few other questions specifically about the Mayflower, the 5th generation database. So Marcia asks, can you browse the Mayflower family's 5th generation database, or do you need to enter a name in the search page?
You can indeed browse. So if you go from the database search page, there's up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little section for browse database, and you can pick a specific volume and a page number and go directly there and browse through it. And what we have online is, as I said, the pages that contain the 5th generation descendants, and we also actually have the index pages from those books too. So anything that's available online is browsable. You can type in page numbers or just click right and left to move within any particular volume to see anything you'd like.
And generally speaking, what is kind of the date range for that fifth generation? So if you're trying to connect your line to what's kind of that fifth generation in the silver books, maybe what date range should you be looking for?
Well, it's surprisingly broad because not all of the Mayflower passengers were the same age when they came, and you have differences in generation. So, generally speaking, they were in the colonial era, so they would be the fifth generation would be from the very late 1600s up till like the early 1800s is sort of the extreme range. I should remember exactly what the average, but I think it was around 1765 or something. Roughly that time frame was what the average of the fifth generation birth years were.
All right, and Kathy asks, so if you don't find an ancestor in that fifth generation database, is it then pretty certain that you're not a Mayflower descendant?
I think that that's a good question. So I guess I wouldn't say that it's definitely out of the realm of possibility that you're a descendant. I mean, there's going to be some cases where there's additional lines that were missed. But if you find yourself in the fifth generation, I think you're almost assuredly in. If you're not, then you're going to have to work a little bit harder just to prove that your connection is accurate and does indeed, there was somebody who was missed in the fifth generation books.
All right, and we also have a few questions asking about people who came after the Mayflower, so after 1620, maybe coming in 1621 on the Fortune, or the John and Mary, or other ships. Would we have resources at AmericanAncestors.org that could assist people in researching kind of those later but still 17th century New England colonists?
Yes, I think we have some excellent resources there. There was the study project that Robert Charles Anderson did was called The Great Migration, and it covers 1620 to, I believe, 1635. So we have those available in terms of The Great Migration Begins, as well as a series of Great Migration books, which covers, as best as is known, all of the passengers that came in those first, say, 15 years, starting with the Mayflower. So you can certainly use that as a great source for tracking people when they first arrived here and where did they settle.
All right, Don. Well, thank you again for your fantastic presentation. I know that there were a lot of questions that we didn't get to today, but if you have a question about any of the databases, navigating our website, or mayflower.americanancestors.org, you can reach out to webmaster@nehgs.org. Also, if you have more specific questions about your research, maybe how to confirm a line, how to apply to the Mayflower Society, or how to break down a brick wall, you could consider scheduling a consultation with one of our genealogists. Those can be done over the phone, online. You don't have to do it in person, or you can also hire our research services team. And both of those services are still available and operational. So again, if you have questions, certainly reach out to those email addresses on your screen. I'll also be including their contact information and some other links in my follow-up email later today. So thank you, everyone, again for joining us today. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. And if you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org/education. So stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.